So do you want to start by just like introducing your practice or something a little bit?
Okay, sure. So, my name's Kenny, and I work as an object maker, designer based in Sydney. My practice is based in Sydney, but depends where my work is. I tend to travel places. So with my practice, the basis of my practice, it's based on traditional jewelry and metalcraft techniques, and that's just because that's my background in terms of what I studied and where I got my training. So most of what I do, the primary material tends to be, I guess, metal, just because I know it better than any other materials, but other materials I often introduce just depending on what the specific project is. Yeah.
Also, I would just like to start asking some questions.
Sure.
So the first one is, you've mentioned that your work aims to add value to everyday environments. Do you take any steps to maintain an eco-conscious practice, like sustainability or?
Sure. I mean, that is, I guess, the whole core value of or ethics of my practice. Really, I with everything that I create, and often I create work in, I guess, a batch format where only maybe a certain number is created each time, say 20 or 50, depending on how many I need to create for that order. And to do that, basically, the reason for that is so that I don't create, an excess number of basically mass of whatever it is, and basically, to do that, it's sort of like I have control of the numbers that get created, and then once that batch finishes, and then I just go on and create another batch for that order, or for and everything that I create, it's basically created with the intention that it lasts my lifetime or the generation after that, or perhaps even further. And I think to do that with a craft-based practice, it's got to have a couple of things, but I think the most important things would be functionality. I make work that function, and work that doesn't function loses life, and then it just becomes, I guess, like an art object that you look at and you really have no use for. But an art object, it's fine, but for me that's not an intention. If I make a cup, it's got to be a cup that works like a cup, and on the other side it's got to have that aesthetic beauty as well. And whether something's beautiful or not, it's quite an open subject. It's very hard to say what's beautiful and what's not. But I believe that there's definitely a fine line that determines, I guess, to the large numbers, whether something is beautiful or something isn't. And if you have those few things, and I think that particular work has potential to live forever, and thus, in sense, meaning it's something that you want to hold on to, you want to keep, and you're almost heartbroken if it's broken or if it's lost. So in saying that, you don't end up buying another one of that, another one of that, another one of that.
Less waste.
Yeah, so I guess that sort of answers your question.
Yeah.
And to follow on from that, as a handcrafting designer, do you ever feel threatened by mass-produced decor from Kmart and stuff like that, or does it impact your
Not
work?
really. I mean, I think, well, first of all, I think the target market's completely different. I think there's room for that. There's nothing, well, there is, but I mean, I'm not saying it's wrong to buy or have that $2 cup from IKEA. There's nothing wrong with that. That's also a design practice, and that follows certain principles that they sort of push forward, and and there's room for that. There's always room for that mass, but at the same time, what I'm sort of trying to put forward are, I guess, objects that it's not for everyone, definitely, and it's not for the generic market. Often ends up being a market where for individuals that really appreciate what they use and think about the objects that they use on a daily basis, and often these end up being just from experiences, ends up being people that are in the creative field, say architects, or people that just love objects with a little bit more aesthetic and craft value added towards it. So I think it's a complete different market that, say Kmart.
Different target audience.
Yeah.
What would you say is your target audience, or what kind of people buy your products?
I think most of the people that ends up buying my things, like I said, they belong to this creative scene or they work around it. Just because I think they are, or they tend to be a little bit more educated in that sort of realm. Yeah. So they appreciate what they use, and
Like other designers.
yeah, well, exactly. So it's like, when, for instance, I have a measuring scoop that I bought off a friend of mine who's metalcraft or object maker as well, and it's a beautiful object, and I really have this sense of happiness every time I use it. So I tend to use it just because of that, because that, I don't know, 30-40 seconds of scooping coffee beans, when I'm holding that material, not only am I just thinking about, not only am I not actually, in a normal case, when you're scooping coffee beans, often you're not thinking about anything, but in this case, that 30 seconds, I'm thinking about how much beans I'm scooping and what I'm scooping with, the material of it, the maker, and what process should follow after I scoop the beans, and it just adds a little bit more value to that everyday act. So
making something ordinary more enjoyable and
yeah.
Okay, cool. Another question is, a large part of any creative practice is collaboration and exhibition. How do you go about making those connections, and is it ever problematic?
I like collaborations, and I mean exhibitions. They're, I guess, two different things, but often I work on my own and I quite enjoy that. But just getting outside of that and working with other people, it's just good. It's just often, I always believe two brains are better than one, and when you have someone that share a similar sort of value, aesthetics, ethics about this practice, often something really cool comes about. So that's why I really enjoy collaborations. In terms of exhibitions, with my regular work, it's almost like just work, and I almost treat it like just work, like a desk job, like 9 to 5, and it's work that I just create, and I've got to treat it like work, otherwise it becomes more like a hobby. This practice is much more intimate, yes, because I'm sort of working with that material and making it myself often, most times. But at the same time, because it's work, and I'm often producing another one of this, another one of that. So, in the very beginning, you have all this sort of motivation, heart, but it sort of, it's just fact that it sort of drifts away as time goes. So, exhibitions are kind of nice because it allows me to do things that are a little bit outside the ordinary, and all that sort of creativeness and thoughts that build while you're doing your everyday work, you sort of can have that opportunity to devote that into exhibitions. So exhibitions always, I try to fit in at least 1 or 2 a year, just so that I can get that thing out of my mind and heart.
So do you make work specifically for an exhibit?
Yeah,
Or do they ask
yeah. So most times, most exhibitions, I guess, have a theme or a concept or some sort. So often I tend to make new work for exhibitions, and but this is really great because exhibitions are often a little bit more experimental, and from those exhibitions I have a lot of work that are in my production line that have been influenced by the exhibitions that I've been part of, or work that have developed from the exhibitions that I've been part of.
Mm-hmm. So you've never had like any problem? It's never been problematic, or there's never been like issues when you've collaborated with someone, and or has it been pretty smooth sailing?
Yeah, I mean, it's been pretty good because I think I've worked with pretty good people, but at the same time, I guess there are instances where sometimes because you're on such a different level and you work in a very different way, it just ends up, I guess, miscommunication and a lot of words that are sort of lost in between, just because that person A works in I guess just a different field and they have a different approach about their practice, and but in that case, you really have to open up and just take it as is and just sort of like work with that. But if you're sort of working against that, it just becomes hard. And I guess for me, just been pretty lucky to have worked with like-minded people. Yeah.
Cool. What mode of advertising and social media presence is most effective in the sale of your work?
So I would say in terms of my work or the money side of things, maybe 75 to 80% would be through the stockists that I have my work in. So these include galleries, shops, online shops, places that have my work and they retail it out, and that will be the major part or a major part of how I make a living, basically. And another would be through direct contact. Often people just get through to me through my website, or I have a web shop as well, or just like Instagram. I have a little bit of a following of people that appreciate similar things, and often just people just get to me directly through like Instagram or email, and then it often starts like that. And I find social media, as long as you do it right, just a really great way of getting out there and people sort of finding out a little bit more, not just the work but about you as well. And often it has to be like that. I think it's it's not just the work, I think it's the maker as well, and I think both coincide with what you're presenting out there. So so I tend to put a little bit of thought into, not thought, but I guess I almost use it as like a process journal in terms of like Instagram I'm talking about, of my work, what I'm doing at the moment, and what I'm about to do, things like that.
So would you say Instagram's like the most kind of beneficial?
Well, sort of, I guess. I think it's probably half. Like how I originally started out, I guess I just started putting out, process work and images of work out there through social media, and probably mostly Instagram, and then a lot of stores and galleries, they just found out, through Instagram, and then they would contact me like directly through email, or it would be like articles or features that I've been featured in, whether it's like an online design blog or like magazines. Often I get a few contacts, maybe less individuals, but more sort of, I guess, wholesale inquiries from shops and galleries through those. And then after that, I think it just becomes word of mouth. And word of mouth is also a big thing. How, I think you really need to be cautious of everything that you put out there, like your work, because you just, it represents who you are, and when one person sees it, they like it, they'll pass it on to another person, and then they'll say, oh, do you know so and so, his or her work is fantastic, and then it'll just follow on. So yeah.
You were saying before that you usually only create like 20 units of something. Do you have to take any actions to protect it with intellectual property?
Yes and no. This maybe sounds a little bit arrogant, but I sort of have this thing, like, if you can make something that's exactly like what it is, better than me, then go ahead. And with a lot of my work, I think my work is quite individual, sometimes unique, in a way where embedding traditional craft techniques, and often techniques that aren't quite usual or common, in sort of like a design element. The end result, often people go, oh yeah, you work in design, but really, I think the whole process is more craft embedded, and I really believe there's only a handful of people that could or would make what I make, and maybe aesthetically it could look quite similar, but I think it's always down to the details. You can tell if it's good or not, and I guess with bigger companies, bigger brands, it's the same case. But in Australia, really, there's no way of stopping it. In other countries, there are laws that you can put on to stop this, but it's like, as an individual maker, it's not worth putting spending loads and loads of money on copyright. And then if you're making something that is just really you, and it characterizes who you are, and it has your color in it, really, I think not many people will be able to replicate what you do. But if you're just following trends, and you're just making another one of what's already out there, it'll happen, and you can't complain, because you've probably done the same thing.
So have you never had any issues when, like, you've seen, like, your work?
I have.
Could you tell us about that a bit?
I have, and sometimes I just let it go. Like, I'm like, whatever, that's fine.
So it doesn't get to you?
Yeah, it's okay. I can still go, oh yeah, it's not better than mine.
Yeah.
So I just go, no, it's fine. And people are going to know. And people, like, it's not, like, people that know my work already. And
You're
people will know
that because it's yours.
Yeah, and they'll know. So I'm just like, whatever. But, like, I've had an instance where it was, like, exactly, like, the same idea, same thing, same aesthetics, just slightly bigger than what mine was in terms of scale. And I just said, hey, look, I just approached this person directly. Hey, look, just be careful. I think it's getting, awfully similar. And that person was like, oh yeah, like, I didn't know, and they stopped. But it's not like they can not know. It was like exactly the same. But anyways, that's fine. But yeah, nothing biggie in terms of people copying work. Yeah.
Okay. During your time in China, did you observe changes to your practice to cater to different social cultures?
My time in China was good, very interesting in a positive way. Just because, before going to China, I had this mindset of what China would be like, or even talking in relation to art, design, and craft. But it's very different, and not everything made in China is that quality and that standard that you think. Actually, it's some companies and brands, like, just amazing and way ahead of time. And because I guess I don't want to talk too much into, like, the labor and how much people get paid and so forth. But because the labor is cheap in China, they can afford to do what often Australia can't do, because in Australia you whatever it is, you pay someone $300-500 for an hour, and it's just because, and I think that's because there's not enough skill set here. You end up you have no choice but to pay $300-500 an hour to get something done, because there's no one else doing it. So in saying that, I think China's way ahead of Australia in terms of that local manufacture, but at the same time talking about ethics and quality, that's a whole different story. And it's sort of the whole industry side of things. It just sort of, I guess, let me sort of open up a little bit and see the potential that was available in China. So that was really good. In terms of affecting my own practice, not entirely. When I was there mainly looking after a workshop gallery and as a director, and what I was doing, because it was so time consuming, and what I was doing was more sort of coordinating work and managing. So I had to let go of my work a little bit. I couldn't devote 100% into my work, so it ended up being about 30% my work and everything else for that company. So I had less time for my work, and it was hard also because I was in the space that I was used to, and often I have to liaise with I've got, for instance, I've got my own platers, and I've got my own people that does the CNC cutting if I need to here in Sydney, and I already have that connection, but I had to reform that in China. And also that language barrier where it wasn't as easy like just going somewhere and going, hey, can you do this? I had to ask my staff to ask someone else, and so it was it took a little bit of time until I got settled. And but I was just really continuing on with where I left off in Australia and just continuing on with my work, but I just couldn't work as much, that's all.
Great, well that's all the questions we had.
Cool,
Thank
easy.
you so much, that was perfect.
Yeah, thank you.